My friends, if you listen closely to the movements of your own soul, you will notice that attraction is never a random spark between two wandering bodies. It is a dialogue between two unconscious worlds, two ancient histories, two shadows trying to resolve what neither could complete alone. And when we speak of the empath, we are speaking of one who has lived most of their life with their psychic skin removed, raw, open, sensitive to every unseen tremor in the atmosphere. They are not merely kind or intuitive, they are individuals whose childhood demanded intuitive survival. Their gift, which the world romanticizes, was forged not in peace but in psychological fire. And the wound that shaped them is often the wound that shapes their relationships. For you see, the empath does not fall in love with people. They fall into resonance with unresolved patterns. What they call intuition is often memory. What they call chemistry is often repetition. And what they call destiny is often the unconscious attempting to repair something broken long ago. This is why the empath finds themselves drawn again and again to the narcissist. Not because the narcissist is powerful, but because the narcissist embodies the emotional environment the empath once had to navigate, to survive. The ego may protest this, but the unconscious does not lie. It repeats until it is understood. Consider a child who grew up in a household where emotional instability was the weather of the home. One parent withdrawn, the other unpredictable. The child learns to anticipate shifts in mood before they even occur. Their nervous system becomes an instrument finely tuned to detect danger in micro-expressions, silence, tone, or the sudden withdrawal of warmth. They learn to soothe others, to protect themselves. They learn to fix what is not theirs. They learn to earn affection through emotional labor. And slowly, without ever being taught explicitly, they internalize a belief: love is conditional, and my worth is tied to how much I can provide emotionally. This belief crystallizes into what I call the core wound, an archetypal fracture in the psyche where the child's original worth dissolves into self-sacrifice, and the universe, or more precisely the unconscious psyche, will continue to bring people into their life who reflect that original wound. The narcissist, with all their charm, mystery, coldness, and emotional hunger, is simply the most accurate mirror for the empath's internal emptiness. But neither sees this at the beginning. Each recognizes the other not with the intellect, but with a wound. The empath sees the narcissist's hidden suffering and feels compelled to heal it. The narcissist sees the empath's infinite compassion and feels entitled to drink from it. These are not choices, they are compulsions. They arise from the deepest layers of the psyche, where instinct, memory, and archetype intertwine. To break this pattern, one must disown, not ascend, because the wound is not healed by shining more light outward, but by illuminating the darkness within. When the empath finally turns inward to examine the wound they have spent a lifetime avoiding, something profound begins to shift. They discover that their sensitivity was not only a gift, but a shield. They see that their compassion often masked a fear of abandonment. They realize that their endless giving was not always pure, but rooted in the desperate need to be chosen, valued, seen. And in this revelation, the empath confronts the oldest ghost of their psyche, the ghost of the child who once believed they were not enough unless they performed emotionally for others. Healing this wound requires something the empath rarely practices: self-confrontation. Not self-sacrifice, not self-analysis, but self-confrontation, standing face to face with the parts of themselves they have long exiled into the shadow. The part that is tired of overgiving, the part that resents being needed, the part that longs to be cared for instead of caring, the part that is angry, the part that is vulnerable, the part that whispers in dreams, I want to be loved without effort. And so the empath begins the descent. It is not a descent into darkness, but into forgotten truth. I once said that the shadow is not evil, it is merely the part of oneself that has been unlived. For the empath, the unlived self is often the self that chooses, the self that sets boundaries, the self that says no, the self that demands reciprocity, the self that does not apologize for taking up space. Rediscovering this inner figure is the beginning of liberation. Imagine a dream. An empath stands in the forest at night holding a lantern. The trees around them represent old relationships, dark silhouettes of people who drained, manipulated, seduced, or needed too much. The empath believes these trees are alive, but as the light of the lantern brightens, they realize something astonishing. These forms are not people at all. They are projections made of memory, shaped by fear, fed by longing. Only one figure in the forest is real, the empaths themselves. This is the dream of individuation. When the psyche shows the dreamer that they have been wandering through their own illusions, mistaking the ghosts of their childhood for the partners of their adulthood, as the empath begins to claim themselves, the unconscious rewrites the script of attraction. What once magnetized now repels. What once felt irresistible now feels dangerous. What once felt like destiny now feels like déjà vu, an old pattern recognized and dismissed. And this shift appears instantaneous from the outside. Friends, observe the empath acting differently, choosing differently, responding differently. But from within the psyche, this instant is the culmination of years, sometimes decades, of unconscious tension seeking resolution. This is where attraction flips. When the empath heals their core wound, the narcissist loses their power. The empath is no longer seduced by emotional intensity. They no longer confuse chaos with passion. They no longer collapse into self-abandonment when confronted with coldness. And most importantly, they no longer mistake emotional labor for love. The archetypal dance breaks because one dancer has stepped out of the choreography. What causes this flip? It is the moment the empath recognizes that the narcissist was not a soulmate, but a symbol of their own unconscious need to replay the original wound in hopes of transforming it. And once the inner child is seen, acknowledged, and comforted, the psyche no longer needs an external battlefield on which to fight the old war. The narcissist becomes irrelevant, not through anger but through healing. The empath's energy changes, their posture changes, their eyes soften, their breath deepens, their intuition sharpens not in scanning danger but in sensing truth. And this shift is felt not only internally but externally. The narcissist, sensing the loss of control, often reacts with confusion, rage, or indifference because the empath is no longer feeding their illusion. But this reaction only confirms what the healed empath already knows. There's nothing here to fix. In this state, the empath begins to attract differently. They draw in souls who speak the language of reciprocity, individuals whose emotional capacity matches their own, people who do not demand psychic labor but offer emotional presence. This new pattern feels unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, because the empath has spent so long equating difficulty with depth. But the healed psyche gradually learns that peace is not boring, that mutuality is not weak, and that love does not need suffering to feel real. My friends, the true beauty of this transformation lies in something subtle yet profound. The empath does not become less sensitive, they become more sovereign. Sensitivity without sovereignty is vulnerability. Sensitivity with sovereignty is intuition, and intuition without the burden of old wounds becomes wisdom. This is the moment the empath steps into the archetype of the healed healer. Not the savior, not the martyr, but the one who integrates both light and shadow. In this integration, the empath no longer seeks to repair others as a way of repairing themselves. They understand that everyone must walk their own labyrinth. They understand that helping is only meaningful when it does not require self-abandonment. And they understand that love without boundaries is not love but self-erasure. Healing the core wound is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning. It is the moment the empath discovers that the power they attributed to others was always their own. The moment they realize that attraction is not an external force but an internal mirror. The moment they see that when the inner world changes, the outer world must follow. And so when the empath heals the core wound, attraction flips instantly, not because the universe changed, but because the self did. You must understand that every transformation in the psyche occurs first as a tremor beneath consciousness long before the ego becomes aware of it. The empath often sings healing arrives as a sudden insight, a moment of clarity, a revelation that bursts through the chaos. But the unconscious works differently. It does not shout, it stirs. It sends symbols in dreams, synchronicities in daily life, emotional echoes that rise and fall like tides. And when the empath is on the verge of healing the core wound, the unconscious signals this shift in ways the rational mind cannot fully grasp. One dream I have often heard from empaths is the dream of a collapsing bridge. They stand at one end looking towards the other side, where a familiar figure waits. Someone they loved, someone they chased, someone who embodied both desire and fear. The empath begins to walk toward them. But with each step, the bridge cracks beneath their feet. Eventually, the path gives way entirely, and the empath stands alone with a sensation of falling. Yet, in this dream, they never actually fall. Instead, time suspends itself. The air thickens. A strange calm settles in their chest. And when they turn around, they see a new path behind them, one that was always there, but hidden by the fixation on the old bridge. This dream symbolizes the dissolution of the psychic structure that once tethered the empath to the narcissistic pattern. The bridge collapsing is the unconscious withdrawing its support for the old bond. It tells the empath, you are finished with this lesson. The falling is the ego's fear, the dread of losing identity, purpose, and emotional familiarity. But the calm that follows is the true self emerging, the inner authority the empath never knew they possessed. And the new path represents the life that can finally unfold when the core wound begins to loosen its grip. The empath often misunderstands this emergence. At first, it appears as emotional numbness, as if their heart has gone quiet. They interpret it as detachment, failure, or regression. But in truth, this numbness is the psyche recalibrating itself. For the first time, the empath is not reacting from survival. They are not scanning, not contorting, not absorbing. They are simply existing, and existence without emotional labor feels foreign. It is the silence after a storm, unnerving precisely because it is peaceful. The narcissist senses this shift long before the empath names it. Those who are accustomed to feeding on the emotional intensity of others recognize immediately when the empath's energy withdraws. Even if the empath says nothing, even if they continue to behave with kindness, something deeper has changed. The empath's inner child is no longer running the show. The narcissist feels this as a loss of gravity, as if the invisible rope that once connected them has gone slack. This is why narcissists often react with confusion, seduction, rage, indifference, or sudden attempts at reattachment. They do not miss the empath, they miss the supply. They miss the emotional resonance that validated their grandiosity and concealed their fragility. But the healed empath no longer responds to these signals. What once triggered empathy now triggers awareness. What once elicited compassion now elicits understanding. And understanding is the end of the illusion. You may ask, what does the healed empath truly look like? Not the idealized version, not the hopeful dream, but the actual psychological reality. They speak less, but their words carry gravity. They feel deeply, but no longer drown in the feelings of others. They sense suffering, but no longer take responsibility for fixing it. They remain kind, but their kindness is no longer a doorway for exploitation. They become soft but not fragile, firm but not rigid, open but not porous. This balance is not achieved through discipline alone, but through integration. The inner child, the survivor, the shadow, the caregiver, the intuitive, all parts of the empath begin to communicate. The psyche becomes a council rather than a battlefield. And when that happens, attraction transforms at the root. Before healing, the empath is drawn to intensity because it resembles emotional truth. After healing, the empath is drawn to authenticity because it resembles emotional safety. Before healing, the empath gravitates toward wounded individuals because they mirror the empath's internalized responsibility to repair what is broken. After healing, the empath gravitates toward emotionally mature individuals because they mirror the empath's rediscovered self-worth. Before healing, the empath chooses with memory. After healing, they choose with vision. This flip is so profound that it often changes not only who the empath loves, but what the empath notices. Their attention shifts from dramatic personalities to subtle presences. They become attracted to quiet strength rather than overt charm, to consistent warmth rather than explosive passion, to someone who does not need them but values them. They begin to see red flags not as puzzles but as warnings. They listen to discomfort as communication rather than self-criticism. They learn that attraction without peace is trauma in disguise. Let me tell you another symbolic experience. Many empaths share the moment they realize They are no longer impressed by what once captivated them. A narcissist speaks with charm and confidence, but the empath hears the hollowness beneath the surface. A manipulative person gives a dramatic justification, but the empath senses the disconnection between their words and their energy. Someone performs emotional grandiosity, but the empath sees the child beneath the mask. This is not cynicism, it is discernment. And discernment is the opposite of the core wound. Discernment is the healed empath's new compass. When the empath heals the core wound, something remarkable happens in their body. The nervous system stops bracing for impact. Shoulders drop, the jaw softens, breath expands, the body begins to trust the present moment. For the first time, safety exists, not in pleasing others, but in protecting oneself. And this subtle shift sends a signal to the unconscious. The old pattern is no longer needed. This is where the archetype of the wounded healer dissolves and is replaced by the archetype of the sovereign healer. The sovereign healer is not someone who heals everyone. They are someone who refuses to abandon themselves in the process. They understand that energy is not infinite, that empathy is not a currency, that love is not salvation. They do not seek to save others from their darkness, but to illuminate their own inner world so thoroughly that no narcissistic shadow can consume them again. In this transformation, the empath begins to dream differently. They dream of open fields rather than confined rooms. They dream of walking rather than searching. They dream of voices that speak with clarity rather than riddles. They dream of a home, a symbol of the integrated self. The unconscious communicates healing not through logic but through image. And every dream reflects a psyche stepping into wholeness. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this journey is what happens in the external world. The healed empath becomes invisible to narcissists, not literally, but psychologically. The patterns do not align anymore. The frequency changes. Narcissists may approach, but the empath does not resonate. They do not provide the emotional cues narcissists rely on. They do not offer the subtle dance of giving, absorbing, softening, and rescuing. This lack of resonance repels the narcissist who moves on instinctively in search of a more compatible unconscious field. Likewise, emotionally healthy individuals begin to feel drawn to the empath's presence. They sense the steadiness, the inner clarity, the quiet strength. They sense someone who listens not to fix but to understand, someone who feels without absorbing, someone who gives without losing themselves. This new attraction is not based on need but on recognition, the recognition of two sovereign selves. Meeting in authenticity, the empath often marvels at how effortless this new pattern feels. They realize that healing was never about fighting the narcissist or resisting the pattern. It was about dissolving the wound that made the pattern necessary. And when the wound dissolves, the psychic magnet reverses polarity. The empath no longer seeks intensity because they are not mistaking intensity for love. They no longer seek brokenness because they are not mistaking repair for purpose. They no longer seek chaos because they are not mistaking chaos for depth. They no longer seek the narcissist because they are not mistaking abandonment for destiny. This is the true meaning of attraction flipping. It is not punishment or reward. It is simply alignment. When the inner world changes, the outer world must follow. The universe does not withhold healthy love. The unconscious simply cannot recognize it until the wound is healed. Thus, healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world told you otherwise. And when the empath returns to this original self, attraction becomes not a trap but an expression of freedom. There comes a moment in the empath's journey when the past begins to lose its grip, not because it is forgotten, but because it is finally understood. And this understanding is not intellectual. It is somatic, instinctive, archetypal. It comes like dawn, breaking slowly over the mountains of the psyche. At first, only a faint glow touches the edges of awareness. Then a softening, a warming, a shift in the air, and suddenly, without trying, the empath notices something astonishing. They are no longer drawn to what once magnetized them. The pull is gone, not through resistance, but through evolution. This moment often feels surreal. The empath sees the narcissist behaving in the same old ways, charm woven with insecurity, confidence overlaying hollowness, intensity masking emptiness. But instead of feeling compelled to rescue or understand, the empath feels distance, not coldness, but clarity. A clarity that says, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not my responsibility. And this clarity arrives without bitterness. It is the natural byproduct of the psyche no longer projecting its wound onto the world. You must understand projection is unavoidable in the early stages of psychological development. We do not see people as they are. We see them as mirrors for unresolved aspects of ourselves. The empath projected their need to heal onto the narcissist, and the narcissist projected their need to be glorified onto the empath. This mutual projection felt like intimacy, but it was simply the unconscious seeking its own reflection. When the empath withdraws their projection, when they take back their longing, their fear, their childhood ache, the entire structure collapses. The narcissist no longer sees admiration in the empath's eyes, and the empath no longer sees promise in the narcissist's emptiness. This collapse is what I call the psychic inversion. The moment the direction of energy reverses. For most empaths, this inversion arrives gently. It shows up in small, subtle moments. A delay in responding to the narcissist's message, a lack of emotional urgency, an absence of guilt in setting boundaries. Yet beneath these small behaviors lies a monumental shift. The empath's self-worth is beginning to migrate from external validation to internal stability. The core wound, once a gaping psychological cavity, has begun to close. Healing does not erase the wound, it integrates it. The empath learns to hold the memory without recreating it in the present. They understand why they once tolerated disrespect, why they once mistook intensity for meaning, why they once accepted crumbs while offering sustenance. And this understanding frees them from repeating the pattern. Imagine a symbolic image. A river that once flowed violently, carving deep grooves into the earth, now calms. The water still moves, but with grace rather than desperation. The banks no longer erode, the earth no longer trembles. This is the healed empath. The same sensitivity but no longer destructive. The same depth but no longer compulsive. The same love but no longer self-negating. In this new state, the empath begins to experience something they have long been denied: reciprocity. Not the illusion of it, but the lived reality. Someone speaks to them with gentleness, and they do not shrink. Someone offers affection and they do not question their worthiness. Someone expresses a boundary and they do not feel abandoned. Someone shows consistency and they do not feel bored. This shift is revolutionary because the empath's nervous system is finally learning what healthy love feels like. Not chaotic, not conditional, not painful, not performative. But before this new pattern fully stabilizes, the empath often experiences an intermediate stage I call the psychic shedding. It is a time when old emotions surge unexpectedly: grief, anger, loneliness, relief. They may find themselves mourning not only the narcissist but also the version of themselves who endured so much. They may grieve the years spent overgiving, the childhood moments swallowed in silence, the love they poured into places where it could not take root. This grief is sacred. It is the soul recognizing its own resurrection. During this shedding, many empaths report dreams of water, floods, rain, ocean waves rising and falling. Water is the symbol of the unconscious, the realm of feeling, memory, intuition. These dreams indicate that the psyche is cleansing itself, releasing emotional residues that have been stored for decades. Sometimes the water in the dream is murky, sometimes it becomes clear. Sometimes the dreamer is drowning, sometimes they rise effortlessly to the surface. The water mirrors the psychic process exactly. And then something even more symbolic occurs: the appearance of thresholds, doors, gates, bridges, open fields. These images mark transitional phases. A door opening gently means the psyche is ready for a new narrative. A door locked or jammed means resistance remains.